Glad to see everybody back here. I'm glad we're back in meeting again. Our speaker tonight is Erin Garrett. She's a natural resources, environment, and energy educator for University of Illinois Extension. She serves in Alexander, Johnson, Massac, Pulaski, and Union counties in southern Illinois. Erin develops and delivers high-impact programming to adults and youth to help them develop an appreciation for natural resources and to empower them to make small changes to positively impact the environment. Erin's programming focuses on why homeowners should consider choosing native plants, how to support native pollinators, how to identify grasses, how to identify and maintain invasive species or manage invasive species. We don't want to maintain them, and develop an appreciation for prairie ecosystems. Erin was with us last spring to talk to us about native plants for shady gardens. And tonight she's going to tell us about native grasses that can be used in our urban or suburban places. So when we have spaces at a premium. So please welcome back Erin Garrett. Erin.
Thank you so much for having me back. I'm happy to be speaking with you again. I'm happy we still have the Zoom option available because it makes it where I don't have to drive across the whole state to be with you all. So happy to be back today. We're going to be focusing on gardening with grasses and taking a look at native grasses that we can use in our home landscapes. So just to give you a brief outline of what we're going to be talking about today, we're going to talk a little bit about why we want to consider putting grasses into our home landscape, talk about why it's important to put native plants in, which it sounds like we're all on the same page with that, but always good to refresh versus those non-native plants. We'll talk a little bit about the how-to of where to find the plants, which it sounds like you have some there tonight, which is awesome, planting them and then maintaining them. And then we're going to go through 13 different options of native grasses that you can consider adding into your home garden. And I'll also intersperse through there some of the non-native and invasive grasses that you typically find in a home garden and how you can replace them because they have similar growth habit or color or things like that with the native grasses instead. And then I have a few examples of landscaping with grasses from my own home garden and other gardens in the area. So let's dive right in. So why grasses? I love grasses, obviously. I'm here talking about them tonight. And I think they're a really underappreciated group of plants, but they bring a lot of different desirable traits for the garden. So first off, they're perennial plants. I don't know about you, but I don't like having to plant something every single year in the garden. Annual plants are not my favorite. So I definitely like being able to plant something once and then care for it. I really like the way that the seed heads look on grasses as well. And that's one thing that you'll notice as we look at the different examples today is just the variation in how the seed heads can appear on these grasses. This one right here is one of the wild rise, and I think it looks beautiful, especially with the sun coming behind it. When we talk about fall color, a lot of the times we like, right, when plants look showy in the fall as well. And a lot of these grasses can turn like a golden or even an orange color in the fall. So they kind of keep that seasonal interest going. Many of them form or grow in bunches as well. So they look kind of neat and tidy rather than growing, you know, with rhizomes, kind of like the grasses that you find in your lawn, right? Where they creep or they spread over time. Some of them do, but a lot of the ones that we talk about, they grow in a nice little bunch. And then of course, if you leave them standing throughout the fall and into the winter, which is something that we would encourage you to do for pollinator habitat, they can provide that different interest too. And I also like adding them because they add different movement and sound into the garden, which is always nice because again, adds another sensory element into a garden. Okay, so what are some examples? This one right here is river oats, and I love it because it has a really interesting seeds on it, and they're arranged and they kind of droop over to the side. They turn golden orange in the fall. So this kind of has a lot of those different traits that I just mentioned. This is obviously not planted in home garden. This is in a restoration. This is little blue stem, and I included this picture because you can really see the red color that it displays in the fall. Here with these grasses, you can see the bunch form really well. So these in the back are switchgrass, and again in a nice tight bunch. I believe this one is prairie drop seed, and I don't remember what this one is because I didn't take a picture of the label at this garden. I just took a nice big picture of all the grasses growing in clumps. But you can see how if you space them far apart, they look really great as a statement piece. And if you kind of clump them together, they'll fill in all that extra space between them and form a nice ground cover as well. Okay, here's another example of, this is the river oats again, and you can both see the bunch form, and then we have it in a sensory garden that I manage, and so we put it in the sound bed because, of course, when the wind moves through the grass, it rustles and it sounds really pleasant. Okay, but besides how they look in our gardens, they, of course, play a really important ecological role. And when we talk about supporting wildlife, grasses aren't really the first thing that comes to mind, which is true because they're not the most important thing for wildlife, but they do play a role, and more so on habitat rather than directly through food for a lot of our critters. Specifically, when we talk about pollinators, which a lot of us are focusing on, right, when we're planting native plants, again, it's more of that habitat. But then there are certain caterpillars from skipper butterflies that do feed on some of our native grasses. So you can find caterpillars feeding on grass. I actually found a caterpillar today eating grass. So they do use it as a food source. It's just not, of course, as widespread. And I put this picture in here because I really like finding tree frogs on these prairie grasses. And if you look close, there's not just one, there's two in this picture hiding over here. Okay, so to contrast this with our ornamental grasses that you'd find at your big box store and unfortunately in a lot of garden plantings, businesses, hospitals, things like that, they're often non-native. And of course, this is a problem because they can escape your yard and establish in natural areas. Even if you don't think that that plant can get spread, wildlife are going to come, eat the seeds, disperse them. Some of them can move on the wind. They can get out. And they also might not have the same wildlife benefit that some of the other grasses would have. And I point out this example, this here is a Chinese fountain grass on the left. This is in a planting. And a few years ago, I was hiking at a state park and I found this grass right here. And this was in November. It was very late in the season and I found a grass that was still green. So of course I was curious and I looked closer and I saw this seed head. Which again is not intact because it was November. But I looked through my keys and it ended up being a version of Chinese fountain grass that had popped up in this state park. So these grasses can get out and move to places where we don't want them to be. And so, of course, that's what we're talking about tonight, is encouraging you to not plant this, or if you have it, to take it out and to replace it with something native. Again, why are we choosing natives? More specifically, again, with our other native plants that are flowering or trees and shrubs, native plants make or break our food webs. And that's because 90% or 9 out of every 10 insect larvae, like our caterpillars, only eat the plants with which they co-evolved. And insects are, of course, super important because they convert plants into a food source themselves that's much more easily digested by animals. Specifically our birds, right? It's a lot easier for birds to eat a nice squishy caterpillar than a blade of grass. So really important role, really important part of the food web, and especially for skipper butterflies, right? Their larvae are going to eat grasses. Of course, we've already talked about habitat and how choosing native plants can help prevent the spread of those non-natives. Okay, another thing that I wanted to touch on is nativars. If you're familiar with those, it's a cultivar of a native plant. So cultivars are developed in the horticulture industry to kind of breed for certain desirable characteristics in that plant. But in the process of those changes and those different traits being selected for, sometimes there can be unintended consequences that make the plant have lower wildlife and pollinator value. And so again, they're artificially selecting for certain genes within the range of the natural variation. So sometimes things that they change, of course, this isn't really the case with grasses, different flower size and color, but they can change like the color of the seeds or the spikelets in grasses. Different levels of pigments in the leaves. This is super popular in the grasses. And a lot of the times you'll find like redder varieties or purple varieties, or even like a lemon, like yellow color leaf, right, in a grass. And if you change that color, those pigments in the leaves, you can potentially make it where it's not palatable anymore to those feeding insects, like those caterpillars and other plant bugs too. It makes a lot of the plants sterile as well, and then can of course reduce genetic diversity overall for that specific plant. So in general, if you can find the wild type of a plant, that's recommended as the best choice. Now, there is a lot of research going on about nativars. They are finding that certain, have the same pollinator value as the wild type plant, but there's so many different versions of them, and it requires a lot of study, and we're really just dipping our toe in the pond. So at this point, my recommendation is still to kind of stick with that wild type native if you're able to get it. Okay, we're talking about grasses, but I want to make sure that I mention sedges as well. Sedges are grass-like plants. Most of them have a triangular stem rather than a round stem that grasses have. And there are tons of great options of sedges for the home garden too. So definitely if adding grasses is something you're interested in, don't overlook the sedges. We're not going to talk about them today, but I just kind of wanted to mention that. Most of them stay a lot shorter than the grasses we're going to talk about today. So they can be really great ground covers. And a lot of them do well in moisture habitat as well as shade. So if you have like a tricky spot in your yard, there's probably a sedge that would grow there and do pretty well. This one at the top is rosy sedge, really, really pretty when it's in bloom, just adds a different textural contrast. Okay, where and when to find these plants? Again, I feel like you all already know this. There are local native plant nurseries. There are, of course, plant sales like the one that you just hosted. I heard that someone is selling them out of the back of their car still, so check that out. And of course, there are still online nurseries that you can order from. If you're looking for something really specific that you might not be able to find locally, there's a wealth of different options out there. And what I recommend is going to the Illinois Native Plant Society's website because they have listings of all of these plant sales, nurseries that you can check out and choose for yourself where you want to buy your plants. Okay, so once you get the plant, well, maybe we should back up a second. What life form should you buy the plant in? You can start from seed, or you can start with a potted plant. And what size potted plant should you get? Should you pay a little bit more for a bigger plant, or should you go with a smaller plant? In my experience, if you get these little, 4-inch, 2-inch pots, that's a 2-inch pot, not a 4-inch pot. The plants take about 2 years and then they're very well established. So I've had a lot of luck with the plants that I have gotten, and they do really, really well. So I don't think it's really worth it to get a bigger pot to start from. You can plant these in either the fall or the spring. I personally like planting my native plants in the fall because they have a little bit of an easier transition time, starting to go into the winter and have a period of rest before having to grow again, rather than planting it in the spring. And then our summers are raging hot down in Southern Illinois, so it can be a little bit tough on those plants. You can't start these from seed because it's less expensive, but it's also less reliable. If that's something you're really into and you're dedicated to it and you want to go for it, you can do that. I've learned over the last few years that I prefer to just buy the potted plant rather than starting from seed because I'm a little bit impatient. Okay, what do we do for maintenance for these grasses from year to year? A lot of the grasses we're going to talk about are prairie plants. And so, of course, they're adapted to fire. They have long root systems and they need that disturbance to kind of kick that grass back. Of course, I'm not telling you that you're going to put fire in your home garden. We're going to try to mimic that basically by cutting that foliage back. So between the seasons, between the growing seasons, you're going to want to remove the bulk of that foliage. However, if you want to support pollinators, you can leave the stems themselves intact through the fall and winter. You can leave the leaves too. I do. I leave the whole grass until the early spring. And when I start to see other things around it greening up, I kind of will look down at the base of the plant and see if I start to see green shoots from that grass. And at that point, then I cut it back all the way down as far as I can get, cut all the leaves back. You'll notice over the years that your native grasses, the bunch grasses, will form like a crown. And so I try to cut that back as far as I can, since I'm not going to be burning it, right? Okay, so that's kind of the background info on native grasses. Now we're going to move into the 13 different options that I have selected for you today. And I'll just note this picture in the background, this is a switchgrass, and that's the first one we're going to look at. So keep this picture in your mind. This is a cultivar of switchgrass that was selected to really highlight the red in this grass. So you can see the really red leaves and the really red inflorescence. This grass naturally has some red in it, but they've kind of accentuated and picked out that trait for this cultivar. So again, not something that I would necessarily recommend because I think it looks beautiful on its own. I like the green leaves. I like the red seed heads that it naturally has. So first up, switchgrass. This is going to get 4 to 6 feet tall. So this is going to be one of your statement grasses. It is a bunch grass and it likes full sun. For this one, if I was choosing where to put it in a garden, you could plant a whole row of it and make a border. You could keep it individual as kind of a statement plant. And the visual interest points that I like about this is that the whole grass turns like a golden to a pale yellow in the fall. And the leaves, once they die or they senesce, they curl really tightly around the stems. I don't have a good picture of it, but it just provides a different look. The leaves are straight when they're growing, but then they curl really tightly in these ringlets when they dry. Really, really beautiful. The seed heads too, I think are really stunning, and they're big. They're like a foot tall and really light and airy and just really gorgeous to look at. So if I was replacing a non-native grass with switchgrass, I would replace Chinese silvergrass, and that's this grass. It's one of the miscanthus or a maiden grass, it's silvergrass. They have 1,000 different names, and you've no doubt seen this grass planted all over the place. It comes in a whole bunch of different cultivars. There's this zebra one that's striped, and it's a big, massive grass. So switchgrass isn't going to get that big. But if you're looking for a statement grass that kind of has, you know, a panicle on top and can be reddish in color and have, you know, just more of that statement element to it, I would replace this with a switchgrass. Okay, next up is big blue stem. Big blue stem can get even taller, so 5 to 8 feet tall. It does grow in a bunch. You might not have realized that about big blue stem, because oftentimes, like in a prairie restoration, it's growing so thick that you can't tell that it's growing in an individual bunch, but you can see that in this image here. It's going to want full sun as well, and I'd use it in kind of the same way. You could plant a bunch of it as a border, or you could have it as a statement plant by itself. This one, of course, these pictures are showing the color. I love the color of big blue stem. And of course, botanists like to name red things blue. That's just what happens. So most of the coloration that you're going to see on big blue stem is red, but you can sometimes see some purple or some blue in the leaves as well. And then, of course, their seed heads, beautiful, turkey foot shaped. Absolutely love big blue stem. This one can spread a little bit, so I would, rather than like a switchgrass that keeps that tight bunch, big blue stem does have some rhizomes and it can spread. So I'd be just intentional on where I planted it. If you had it as a statement plant and then you were mowing around it, right, or it was mulched around or otherwise divided from the surrounding foliage, that would be a good move. And I would use this as a replacement again for that Chinese silvergrass. Okay, Indian grass is one of my absolute favorites, and I try not to say that about every grass. But this one is just a stunner. Absolutely love this prairie grass. Same height as big blue stem, 5 to 8 feet tall. Another bunch grass, another one that likes full sun. This is kind of the same. Use it in the same ways. I definitely would use it as a statement plant. I think it looks great on its own. This one, it's hard to see in these pictures, but if you are comparing the foliage color of this grass to everything that grows around it, it's really blue-green or kind of a blue-gray in color. So it's a little bit of a different color. It's not like bright green foliage, but it's definitely like grayer or bluer. And then the seed heads are my absolute favorite. They're still contracted in these images, but it will open into like a panicle. And they're golden orange. They're silky. They're so beautiful in the fall. Absolutely love having that addition in the garden. And this one I would use as a replacement for hardy pampas grass, which is this one right here. So again, another one that you've probably seen. It's a non-native, and this one gets huge. This gets over 12 feet tall. So again, Indian grass isn't going to have the same height, but it has the same kind of feel, the same look, same kind of growth form. So I think it's a really good suitable replacement for this pampas grass. All right, little blue stem. We're going to move to a few shorter grasses now. So those are our really big, tall statement pieces. That might not be something that you find a place for in your garden, but you might want something a little bit shorter. So little blue is a great option. Stays usually under 3 feet tall, but I've seen it get 4 feet tall. Another bunch grass, another full sun grass. And I can tell you, it does not like shade, because I've had one in the shade because I had no other place to put it, and it was very angry. So full sun for sure for little blue. You could use this as edging. You could use it as a statement grass, add it into a larger pollinator planting. Lots of different options for little blue. This one, kind of the red to orange foliage, and the fluffy white seeds are really the showstoppers. I had a different picture that I obviously didn't put it in here, that really shows the red orange stems. You can kind of see them in this image here, but really it's just a stunning plant in the fall. And I love all the little fluffy spikelets, little seeds all along the grass too. Okay, another one is side oats grandma. This one gets to be the same height, 2 to 3 feet tall, but again, down by me, I've seen it get 4 feet tall. Another bunch grass, full sun grass. This one I would use kind of as an edging. It will the foliage stays pretty short, like under a foot tall. And then you can see the flowering stalks that appear here with the little spikelets or seeds all along them. And they can be reddish in color in the fall, and then they turn kind of this straw color. And it's called side oats grandma because a lot of the times the stem with the spikelets on it will hang to one side or nod to the side, and all the spikelets hang off on the bottom. Really beautiful. I have this one in my home garden. I have most of the ones we've talked about already in my home garden, and I really like it. It's just really delicate and airy, and kind of a fun one to add in there. Okay, prairie dropseed. Even if you talk to your neighbor who knows nothing about plants, I'm sure that even they, if given a picture, could say that they've seen this plant. This is one of the top 10 most common native plants in the industry currently. Prairie dropseed is planted everywhere, even in places you wouldn't expect, in front of the doctor's offices, in front of the grocery store. Prairie dropseed is making its spread, and you can see why. I absolutely love this plant. It is beautiful. It forms these amazing tight bunches with these super fine textured leaves, tons of them all packed into a bunch, and then it blooms, and it it looks so beautiful. I absolutely love all these delicate seed heads that just kind of create this cloud. Really, really stunning plant. So for this one, the height, the foliage usually stays under a foot tall, but then when it blooms, those stalks can be up to 3 feet tall. Great plant for edging or filling a space for something that you need to stay pretty short. I've already talked about the different visual interests that I like about it. Something that's fun with this plant too is if you catch it at the right time in the fall and you take the seeds off of the plant, they smell like buttered popcorn. So really fun with prairie drop seed. And for this one, I would use it to replace a couple different things. Blue fescue is one, and Chinese fountain grass is another. So this is the blue fescue. Again, it's a different color, but it has kind of that same compact, short form with those really fine leaves. So I think that the prairie drop seed is a great substitute for that. And then that Chinese fountain grass that we already talked about as the escaped non-native that I found at the state park. And it comes in many different colors of the spikelets. So again, in this case, you're getting kind of a different look, but you've got a bunch grass with lots of thin leaves and then kind of a fluffy seed head. So I think it would be a suitable replacement. Okay, river oats, we're finally moving into some grasses that can take some shade. So river oats, also called sea oats, inland oats, has a whole bunch of different names. This is another one that I find very popularly used in landscaping. This picture on the right was taken at a zoo, actually. So this grass can get up to 4 feet tall. It is a spreader. So I've planted it as a bunch before, and I've also planted it from seed, and it will spread over time. So just be careful with that. This one is known to be pretty aggressive. So it works in places where you have a strong edging. So this was in a zoo, right? And they had concrete around it, and that worked really great. Or just being really intentional about where you plant it. It does really great. It can fill a space. It looks fantastic. But if you're planting it next to a whole bunch of other things that you want to have there, just be mindful that you might be weeding a lot and you might really have to keep it in check. Like I said, can go into part shade. This is a natural like woodland plant. So you usually find it in kind of the understory. I love it because it has a wider leaf than most of the other grasses that we have seen, which is just a little bit of a different look. And then those flattened seeds that I talked about before, that golden orange color, and they will also like dangle to the side, like you can see here. They start off green and then they turn that color. The leaves themselves can turn kind of a golden color, but really it's those seed heads that really are that stand out. So again, what would I use it as a replacement for Japanese forest grass, which is this guy right here. And I chose it because it has that wider leaf blade. And sometimes the river oats can be a little bit more lime green in color, not usually, but just kind of depends on the amount of light that it's getting. Okay. Another shade grass is bottlebrush grass. This is a ryegrass, and we're going to look at another ryegrass in a second. This one gets 3 to 5 feet tall. Again, it's not a bunch grass, it's a spreader. And I would put it in my shade gardens. If you had kind of like a woodland edge area where you don't really have anything growing, you want something there, I'd throw some bottlebrush grass seeds out, or put a few plants in the ground. And of course, it's aptly named because the seed head looks like a bottle brush. And I think it's just a really cool, visually like interesting plant. Really like that seed head with those bristle-like things. Those are called awns. It just looks really striking. And again, I would use this as a replacement for that Chinese fountain grass because it has that more visual seed head. If you're looking for one that is a little bit shorter, this is Silky Wild Rye, and I unfortunately only have pictures of it when it's senesced. I don't have any during the growing season of Silky Wild Rye, but this one stays about 2 to 3 feet tall. grows in the same manner, in the same conditions as the bottlebrush grass, and I'd use it as the same replacement plant. But you see that its seed head looks a little bit different. It nods to the side, and those seeds are kind of clustered closer together, and those awns or those bristles, they don't stick straight out. They kind of go towards the top of the plant. That's Silky Wild, right? Okay, next is woodreed. Woodreed is a taller shade plant. And again, this is it in the fall, and you can't see any of the foliage. But this is another spreader that can get up to 5 feet tall. It would be great in a border in a shaded area. It has really blue-green foliage, just like the Indian grass. But that is a full sun plant. This is going to be our shade plant. And then it has these brownish color panicles or seed heads that they just look kind of fluffy. I really like woodreed. And this one I'd use as a replacement for that hardy pampas grass. Again, if you had a more shaded area rather than using the Indian grass, you could do the woodreed. Now this one isn't a bunch grass, so you have to mow around it or manage around it to keep it in that bunch form, but that's still an option. Okay, moving back to full sun and getting a little bit shorter. June grass is next. June grass is another prairie plant, and it usually stays under 2 feet tall. It's a bunch grass, and I would use it as edging along the edge of a garden. I really like this because of the silvery seed heads that it has, and just the compact, short nature of this plant. It has a lot of different uses. I would use this to replace non-native feather reed grass. This is another one that you've probably seen planted all over the place. Now this one is about 4 feet tall, so you're not going to get the height, but you get kind of the similar bunch, and you get kind of the similar shaped seed heads as well on as the June grass in the feather reed grass. So again, another one that I know I had seen it all the time and I did not know what it was. And then I finally saw it in a place where it was labeled. So I was able to figure that one out. Okay. Another showstopper is gamma grass. Gamma grass is another full sun prairie grass. Gets 3 to 8 feet tall, and it is a bunch grass. This is definitely a statement grass that you wouldn't necessarily want to add into like a small garden, but maybe you'd want to plant out, along, the edge of your driveway, or really give it its space to shine. It has these huge bunches, and its growth form is kind of interesting because as the season progresses, it'll look like the center of the plant. It'll look like someone came and sat down in the center and flattened out the middle of it. This one, you can't see it yet, but it'll really flatten out in the center, and all the leaves will be pushed out to the sides. And over time, the center will start to die back. And that's just kind of the natural form of this grass. The seed heads are really interesting, and they're really, really large. So the first time I saw this grass, I thought this was like a mutant version of big blue stem because it has a turkey foot shaped seed head, but they are, they can be 8 to 12 inches in size. I think it's a really cool plant. It's huge, massive. I think it's really underutilized in like our restoration efforts. And it hasn't really made it too far into the home landscape area yet, but I think there's a lot of potential for it. And this isn't in bloom right here. It has female flowers in the base of the seed head, and then the male flowers at the top. So really, really stunning. And then this one I would use as a replacement for those 2 really large non-native grasses, the Chinese silvergrass and the hardy pampas grass. This would be a great replacement. You can also kind of see some of the red coloration. So a lot of our native grasses, they naturally have red in them, a little bit of purple, or kind of a bluish hue, blue-gray hue. All right, purple love grass. If you're looking to add some color in your grasses, this would be a great option. Usually stays under 2 feet tall. It's a bunch grass. It's really hard to take pictures of. This is the best picture that I had of this clump because those seed heads are just there's so many branches and there's so many little seeds that are all spaced so far apart that it's really hard to get that image. But wow, is that a pop of pinkish purple? It's stunning. I use this as a ground cover or as edging. And it really, the bulk of the size of the plant comes from that seed head, right? I said it usually stays 1 to 2 feet tall. That seed head is a foot tall, kind of like in the switchgrass, but it's on a really, really short plant. So it looks really cool when you find a big bunch of it or if you plant a big bunch of it. And for this one, I'd use it as a replacement for either that purplish version of the Chinese fountain grass, if you're looking to add purple, or purple moorgrass, which is this one. And so again, the replacement just kind of comes from the color, right? If you're looking to add that purple, rather than getting a cultivar of a different plant, you can choose one that's naturally purple in color. There is another purple grass that I didn't include here called purple top. That one is also called grease grass. You may know it by that name. It produces this really greasy, oily substance all along the plant. It's kind of a fun one, but it has these really dark purple, almost black seed heads in the fall. Really, really cool. Another great option. Okay, so what do these grasses look like when we put them in a landscape bed? I took these pictures in late fall. So they're already starting to kind of turn into a little bit of a straw color, which the grasses will get as they overwinter. But this is little blue stem that's planted in a really large cluster in a parking lot. And you can just kind of see the form as the wind is blowing. You can see the individual bunches here, right? They planted them all close together to really get that striking interest. And then here you can see this is after it's bloomed with all the little fluffy white seed heads all over it. I think it's just a stunning plant. Another thing you can see really clearly in this picture is kind of that buildup of dead leaf material right here. So it doesn't look like in this case that they cut the plant down every year. And what you get is just that continual building and kind of forms a small hill if you're not removing that vegetation year after year. Which is fine, but it can help, that disturbance can help if you clip that grass back. Can mimic grazing, right? Here are a few others. This is just kind of a cluster of some native grasses. In the fall, we've got our Indian grass up top here. This is the prairie drop seed. And then over here, this is an individual big blue stem clump. So again, you've got, looks like last year's leaves at the base, and then all of the new growth. It's about 6 feet tall on this one. Okay, here's the story of my garden. I had a spot where I had full sun, and I ripped out the azaleas that were there and wanted to put in a little native plant garden. So I added in my plugs. This was fall of 2021. Put them in the ground. I had some grasses in the back here and some other flowers. And after 1 year, they did okay. This is in the fall, and these are my grasses here, and they look kind of silly because I did have to stake them. What you don't see in this picture is I had 2 goldenrod plants that were supposed to stay under 12 inches tall, and they grew 3.5 feet tall and about 2 feet wide in one season, from this right here to monstrosities. So I decided that wasn't going to work in that space, so they had to go, and I moved them to a different spot. So that was why my grasses looked not so great. But I had switchgrass here, I had some little blue stem back here, I had some side oats grandma grass in here as well. I will tell you, this was all the growth after year 1. This year so far, I just took these pictures. This is one individual switchgrass plant that is so healthy, so big, so lush. It's doing amazing. And it's getting its form this year, right? It's not overcrowded. It has the space it needs, and it's really, I think, going to do excellent this year. So sometimes it can take a couple seasons for that plant to really establish. That's what I'm finding with my natives in general. Some of them will do pretty well right from the get-go in year 1. But other ones, you know, after year 2 or 3, I find that then they really start establishing and get that form that they should have had, that we expect them to have, put it that way. Another one that I'll show, and it looks kind of sad. My parents had this spot in their garden that my entire childhood until today, they could never get anything to grow ever in this spot. It's hot and dry, nothing would ever work. It turned into just a landscape with mulch in it. And so I finally convinced them last year. I said, you know what would work really great there? Native plants. So we put in a few different natives. We added some prairie drop seed in the front. We added in some switchgrass and some little bluestem in the back here. That was last year. I asked for some update pictures, and I forget that when you're as far north as you all are, which is where my parents are at, that things haven't totally gotten to the stage of where we are yet. So I don't have an update on that one, but for tough sites, there's a native plant that can fill in that gap. And we'll see. I'm hoping that I've changed some minds with this one difficult spot, because a lot of those natives, once they get established right after year one of you know, giving them a little bit of supplemental watering, babying them a little bit, making sure they're okay, they do really, really well on their own, especially in those difficult sites. Another thing I didn't mention is just like soil quality. A lot of the times you don't want to have like super nutrient rich soil for the native plants. They don't like that. They do well in nutrient poor soils or where there's more competition for those nutrients. So give it a try. I always recommend trying a native plant and seeing it, how it does. You might be surprised at how well it performs. I believe that's my last slide. And so I think we have some time for questions if anyone has any questions. But I do want to say thank you. I appreciate you asking me to come back. I love talking about anything native plant related. So I'm happy to be here sharing what I love with you all. So thank you. Any questions? And Janet, you're muted if anyone has a question from the in-person.
There we go. Okay. So any questions? Yes, Linda.
So I have lots of grass in my yard, and I've been trying to identify it. And I don't feel like I ever find out what it is, if it's a native, if it's a weedy grown. Any suggestions?
Yeah. So
Erin, did you hear that? She's looking for somebody to help her identify grass. Will the master gardeners do that?
Usually what I find is if it gets to a master gardener help desk, it somehow finds its way to my inbox. And it's definitely challenging. If we're talking lawn grasses, that's totally not my area of expertise. And I don't know, because with lawn grasses, we're constantly mowing it. So we're taking away all of those seed heads. We're making it where it's really hard to identify them. If it's just other grasses in general, there are some resources that I've created that are on Illinois Extension's website. We do have a new grasses webpage at Illinois Extension, so you could just search those words together and find it. I have a handout that has like an explanation of how to identify a grass. And then I do have a grass blog, as well as a short video series and a webinar series that talk about different common grasses and how to identify them. So I have tried to produce a lot of that information, but if you had a specific grass that you had a question about, you could send me an email with pictures. The tricky thing about that is I can only do so much without being there in person, right? To actually see the grass, and getting good quality pictures is really key to getting an identification. So if you want to start with an email, and then I do have like a suggestion of what parts of the grass that you could take pictures of to send to hopefully get an ID.
Does that help, Linda? Okay.
Any questions online?
There is also a, the best grass identification book is by Lauren Brown. I think it's called Grasses, Sedges and Rushes. Her original version came out in, I think like 1978, and she just came out with a new version with a co-author in 2020. So there is a new version. It's an excellent guide. I recommend that if you're starting off and want to try to identify them yourself.
Erin, can you send us that name or the,
Yeah, I can email Linda and then she can get it to you.
Okay.
Does that work?
great,
We'll put
thanks.
that in the next newsletter.
Yeah, and I can share my resources too and kind of the links to those. We can do that.
Any other questions?
Okay, then. Thank you, Erin. So we have a few little blue stem pots over there and some sedges.